Paul Robeson died today, age of 77, in a Philadelphia hospital. He was a great singer, a great actor, a black man who was a radical and who was punished for that during the McCarthy era. Robeson was superb at everything he did. He was an All-American football player at Rutgers University, Phi Beta Kappa and valedictorian of the class of 1919. And then he called him a communist, and the State Department at one time took away his passport. He was very ill in recent years.
We will be in this space for every day except the 13th and the 14th. At that time, we're going to be moving downstairs to the Wilkes Studio, which is a rehearsal space that is within Music Hall. Now, without further ado, Robin.
First of all, thank you all for being here, and we're really excited. This is our second collaboration, Scott Davenport Richards and David Cody and myself. This is an opera in progress about singer-activist Paul Robeson.
He's a character that I've been fascinated with for years and years and years.
He lived such a long and varied life. He was an athlete, he was an activist, he was a singer, he was a stage actor, a movie actor. I mean, what aspect of his life do we focus on?
So we need this workshop to really keep getting to the heart of the matter. There's so many different stories to tell about Paul Robeson.
He was one of the most intelligent, brilliant, vocally powerful, dramatic performers of the 1930s.
Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling along.
Before this opera, I only knew him as a singer, but never knew him as a political activist, or the fact that he was the first African-American admitted to Rutgers University and was the valedictorian of his class and played for the NFL.
He was an activist. He's a global leader in human rights. He was an anti-fascist.
He was able to use his art for activism. Some performers have done that since then, but I don't think anyone as compellingly and as controversially as Paul Robeson did.
I was really fascinated by who this person was and how he accomplished what he accomplished and what toll it took on him.
Robeson was promoting equality. Robeson was promoting racial justice. He was promoting things before they had the kinds of convenient names we have for them today.
How we usually start is we do a libretto read. So let's try and keep it as tight as we can. This is a luxurious situation because we have the full benefit of CCM, which is one of the top conservatories in the country, especially for vocal arts and opera, and Cincinnati Opera. And this is a one-of-a-kind collaboration.
A toast to the mighty warrior for socialism. Savoy! Legendary artist of the people.
It's such a huge story. We want to find out, what do we not need to say? What it becomes clear through context? What can we avoid having to spell out?
We have to start talking about what is the story we're trying to tell. I mean, this is a man who was larger than life, and that's really complicated.
Marie, we have an E-flat, E-flat?
Yes.
We don't have a C. Yeah, sure. We'll match our Cs. Directly at 5. We'll start. And...
The ballad Red Summer talks about the black veterans coming back after serving America at the end of World War I, when there was still lynching going on in the Deep South. Robeson witnessed the disgrace.
4, 5, 6, 1. Lock back in, boys. Put that black powder
I mean, this is an ugly little song.
Yeah.
Talking about people who should be celebrated for coming back and fighting for their country. So it's okay if it gets scary and ugly at the end and watch them swing.
If we avoid history, we can't fix it. If we pretend it didn't exist, we can't address or redress. How do we actually convey the horror is the question.
In 1921, Paul graduates from law school, and he meets Essie, who sees this light in him, and together they form a partnership which helps land Paul on the world stage.
Paul is trying to navigate his way among many different worlds. He's coming out of a black world into an international world, into a European world, into a white American world, and the intersections of those worlds are reflected in the music and the musical choices.
You have this light, it radiates in all directions. You have this light.
Essie sings the number, You Have This Light, Paul. And Paul did a lot of research about the pentatonic scale, its roots in folk music, and how universal it is among many different cultures. It is a big link between African music and African American music, and that link is very much what makes American music now.
You have this chance, if you can focus where it makes a difference.
If we take so this is on its most basic level, you can look at it as the black keys on the piano. If you slide the notes of that scale, then it really becomes what we think of as an American blues scale. And the roots of this are African. When Essie is sort of defining Paul, she sings, You have this light, Paul. And she defines that scale and defines him by that pentatonic scale. Then, harmonically, we take those notes and spread them out and move some down by an octave or so. And we and those same notes create that chord. And that's very much part of the vocabulary of mid-century American modal jazz. But all of that is based in the motives that create Paul's music.
Paul was beautiful, brilliant, talented, and charismatic. Many, many people were drawn to him, and many people wanted to profit off of him. Carl van Vechten is a photographer very well known for all of his photographic work documenting the Harlem Renaissance.
His life was dedicated to almost taking the black experience and profiting off of it.
There goes the neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood, that new couple down the block, paler than two stick of chalk.
When we come into the party at Van Vechten's house, they're singing about the white people who are moving up to Harlem, like Van Vechten, who doesn't actually live there.
There's the real estate, white kids jump on board the A, housing values drain away. There goes a Harlem real estate. Can you believe?
Yes, Van Vechten helped Paul and connected him, and he lent money to Essie and Paul, but he was quick to want it back.
Hon, I'm gonna grab an early dinner, then go and meet Harold for a drink. Hungry. See you at home, hon.
See you at home, Joe.
Uta Hagen, she was an actress in the 40s, and she had sort of famously an affair with Paul Robeson that sort of ended her career in Hollywood. The scene with Uta Hagen and Paul, they're rehearsing the production of Shakespeare's Othello. And after rehearsal one day, my husband, Jose Ferrar, goes off with another cast member who he's having an affair with.
How do you feel about Jose having an affair?
I think he's done it before, right?
Yeah.
It's not...
Yeah, but he's done it before. It's never pleasant. And now he's doing it in front of everybody.
Okay, yeah.
With the director, she's just bringing such a meaning to every single thing, and she's always on you saying, no, this has meaning. Say it more properly, or bring this word out.
Let's do it again.
That should be a D map. Oh, you're okay. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. She's perfect.
This is the first time I've been a part of a process where so much is still in flux and the composer is in the room and there's still the possibility of things changing in the score.
As we imagine it should be, or as we imagine it should be.
I would say maybe we could take a little time on imagine. As we imagine it could be.
Musically, it has been set to music. It doesn't mean it is unfixable or unchangeable by any means.
The fact that it's not finished also means that in the rehearsal process, I get to ask questions and occasionally make suggestions, but the cool thing is really understanding what they're thinking.
On some level, there are no simply technical questions, because you always have to go back to the character and the moment of whatever is happening there.
When Paul Robeson travels to the Soviet Union for the first time, he encounters a society that purports to be egalitarian, and that's embodied in the character of the female factory manager.
My character for factory manager is like super cheery and very peppy and happy.
Really? How Soviet of you!
The person who comes in before me, Eisenstein, talks about how there's equality of races and sexes.
Total equality of the sexes!
I think that bringing in the factory manager who's a woman to talk about equality and how she's like the big boss is really empowering in a sense.
Marx kind of reminds us of the kind of militaristic society of the Soviet Union.
In this factory, all workers are equal.
From the manager, me, to the janitor, he, meeting the production quota. Meeting the production quota. Meeting the production quota. Meeting the production quota.
We're all imitating her and it just sounds kind of mechanical in a way, and we're talking about things revolving, and the music kind of reflects that in that it sounds like we're all one big music machine.
Cut to the assembly line. The moving parts of society distribute the load equally.
He believed at the time that communism was a way of living in the world that was more fair than the way that he saw the world around him, particularly in Jim Crow America. And so he embraced what he believed were the egalitarian principles. And of course, the principles were promulgated in Moscow.
Sergei Eisenstein was a Russian film director. He created the idea of montage, cutting images together to put together and make like an idea out of them. He wants him to be a part of this movie together that they're making about Black excellence. That entire scene when they first come to Moscow is all about trying to convince Paul to use this film for the greater good. I'm trying to welcome Paul to Moscow, but I'm also very interested in trying to convince him to stay. I have like this soaring high note, and then the chorus comes in and amplify what I just said.
I welcome you, Paul Robeson, to Moscow, to Moscow.
Eisenstein has a lot of pressure from the Russian government to make this connection work. You start the scene with him welcoming him to Moscow, and then it kind of ends with, this beautiful image of Paul raising up against the hateful white people.
During that moment, Eisenstein will yell out, cut, and splice, and the scene change, in which we're basing on a very Stravinsky-like harmony that goes like this.
Black fists against the sky. Cut. Splice. You above the crowd.
Cut. Splice. And it's using all kinds of different musical materials and kind of arranging it into like a musical montage.
It's fascinating, and then it ends with him saying,
Montage.
Montage.
Turn to section 8, article 123. Zoom in, see him read. Equality of the citizens of the Soviet Union, regardless of nationality or race. In all spheres of life is irrevocable law.
When Eisenstein has Paul read the article of the Soviet Constitution in which racism is outlawed, it is the most consonant, prettiest, sweetest point in the opera, almost saccharine sweet.
All equal, and not just for men, S.E. Totally.
The reality of the Soviet Union is that, though it was outlawed in the Constitution, the racial discrimination continued to exist, and as soon as the Soviet Union ended, became really obvious.
The nation of the future, the people of the future.
Paul's hopes really are embodied in this equality of citizens of the Soviet Union. That motive is there. And then when Uta Hagen and Paul are then walking through Boston together arm in arm, that is what accompanies them. And then it stopped when a white woman spits in her face.
Founding fathers only dreamed.
Paul was the good son. He was 100% Paul. He did well in school, well in sports. He excelled in everything. And that was not the same for his brother, Reeve.
That's rich. The Ashman's gonna send me into exile, expel me from this paradise.
I find Reeve Robeson very intriguing as a character. He's beating himself up, and there's just so much rage and anger that is filled in him.
Your Jesus, and a bag of sharp rocks.
Let's make the bag super here, and the bag of sharp rocks.
And a bag of sharp rocks.
That musical motive is filled with leaps, and in the leap, you have the rock leaping through and landing on the dissonant note. So I'm trying to get the sharpness of the rocks. We're delineating his character as being more bluesy than William. William, who is into maintaining proper white man form, and whereas Reeves is embracing African American form. At that point, you might be mimicking him or imitating him. So, good posture and a bag and.
He's being very mimicking of his gestures, and he's just mocking him in most cases.
You gotta leave. That's rich. The Ashman's gonna send me into exile, expel me from this paradise. Where he bows great, I do not know. For straight.
That's great. Can I give you a couple notes? Yes, please. So much better. I think lean into the consonants on that's rich, meaning not the Ashman. I mean, that is really putting him down. It's like he lost his job and he's working in some sort of ash pit, shoveling somebody's old coal. You're gonna send me into exile when you're the one who's actually in exile?
My challenging factor has been really learning the music because it's not easily accessible. It's written on a context that the composer had worked on before. It's not one of those pieces that's very easy to sing, but once you can actually get it and be able to tell the story, it's just so beautiful.
Toast to the mighty warrior for socialism.
The opera begins with this motive, which is based in a Russian melodic and harmonic scale that was used at the end of the 19th century.
To the future, when it finally catches up with me.
The octatonic scale, which we'll think of with Stravinsky and many people of that period. It is part of the Russian vocabulary. And as Paul is navigating that vocabulary, we have B flat and E. When the Russians are singing or introducing him, they introduce that idea. The two chords are also as far apart harmonically as they can be. They're a tritone apart, and Paul is trying to reconcile two different ideas in his mind all the way through his life. We open with that motive, and we close the first act with this.
Free for the first time in my life, I am
One very interesting moment when Paul just arrived in Moscow.
Will you sing? We love it when you sing.
His Soviet fans are asking him to sing. Some of them ask, hey, could you sing us this famous Russian folk song, Nochenka? And others are like, no, we should ask him to sing black spirituals.
It's a Russian song. Nochenka, not Nochenka. Negro spirituals go down borders.
Before Paul started singing, the Soviet fan was cueing him and just saying, when Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. When these Soviet fans started joining in a choir, Paul was compelled to join in and then finished up in, of course, in his style of that famous African-American spiritual.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
He recorded about over 230-something recordings or songs of the Negro spiritual. And he was famous for that all over the world. In Russia, they knew him by his spiritual. This is something they've never heard before. So, and uniquely American.
This man was dangerous because he had a voice that, first of all, everybody would recognize. He had a personality that was magnetic. He was just waiting for that axe to fall. Because the minute that you open your mouth and say something other than something pretty and something romantic, you invite the scrutiny of those people in power because they're afraid of you.
Another one of the spirituals that's sung is There's a Man Going Round Taking Names. On a word level, the taking names then is related to during the McCarthy era, people had to name names. And that will be accompanying elements in the McCarthy era music.
Are you now a member of the Communist Party? Oh, please. If he gave us a truthful answer, he would be supplying information which might be used against him in a criminal proceeding. I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
During the McCarthy era, Paul Robeson was accused of being a communist. He was blacklisted, and his passport was taken away. He was unable to be hired, unable to travel, and in effect, his voice was taken away from him.
It is 1973 or so, the final scene. For more than a decade, Paul has suffered health issues following a suicide attempt in Moscow in 1961, where our opera begins. As he was lost to cancer, Paul's son Paulie visits him to report on his 75th birthday gala in New York City.
It was standing room only, Carnegie Hall. Everyone there to wish you a happy 75th.
Paul Jr. is Paul's son, who's kind of spending the majority of his childhood growing up in Russia while his father is going around the world doing global activism. Despite how charismatic and how much like magnetism and power and charm that Paul has in the eyes of his son, there's this kind of underlying sense of resentment because all of this activism and all of the work that he was able to do around the world was kind of coming at the expense of being able to give his son like, the proper amount of attention growing up.
I know they did this to you. They're responsible. Somehow they slipped you something in Moscow or London or bought off the doctors.
Did the Soviets actually poison Robeson? We'll never know. Could it have happened? Probably.
There is kind of this like kind of consistent downfall that is always sort of there and is like really expressed in the last scene.
Nothing was in vain, Dad. You spoke the truth. You led the way. They know that now.
It ends up being this really sweet interaction between him and his son where his son is kind of telling him, yeah, you're right, you were ahead of your time and the world's just catching up to you now. The ultimate message and the music at the end is very hopeful.
'Cause your watch was running fast, but no. We're running on the same time.
Some of what made Paul an interesting figure was not only like how intelligent he was or how persuasive he was, but specifically how persuasive and intelligent he was also being a black guy.
We're right behind.
Paul Robeson was someone who had very clear values and a very clear understanding of what was right, and he wasn't afraid of pursuing it and standing up for it.
Hopefully the story brings a little bit more light to what made him significant, the kind of impact that he had, and what he did that we can take and apply to present day situations.
You'll be fighting. I ain't afraid of dying. I ain't afraid. You'll be fighting. I ain't afraid.
The stories about the African history should not be left to spoil or rot. I think it is imperative that as artists, we play a huge role in trying to preserve this. And this work actually serves as one of those masterpieces that helps us to retain and tell the African American history.
It's something that needs to be talked about more and more. And I think this opera is going to do it, shine a huge spotlight on him, his life, his significance and importance to the world, African American history, and American history as well.
What's up ahead, Dad? What do you see? I see a world.
And at the end of the opera, we come full circle from E to E, and finally, Paul creates the world he wants to create. He combines the pentatonic with the Russian scale, and it all comes into one. It comes full circle.
I see.
I think the most remarkable thing that we all found about Paul Robeson was the scope of his vision and the fact that his voice and who he was as a human being had a profound effect that I think we're only just touching upon now.
Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho,